It was supposed to be an ordinary Wednesday afternoon in Miami Gardens, Florida, but at 5:40 p.m., that tranquility shattered with gunshots that would haunt this Miami Gardens community forever. Sarah Gabor, a woman who had known too much hardship in her life, lay dying on the asphalt. 3 bullets had found their mark, the final one stealing away any chance she had of seeing another sunrise. The shooter? Not a stranger lurking in the shadows, not a random act of violence, but someone Sarah had trusted completely. Someone she had called friend. Someone who had opened her door when Sarah had nowhere else to go. This is the story of Joyce Smal, a 64-year-old woman whose act of kindness spiraled into deadly obsession. It's about what happens when the line between love and possession becomes blurred and murder feels inevitable. And it's about a married man who never pulled a trigger, but whose name echoed through every argument, every whispered conversation, and ultimately, every bullet fired that day. What drove a woman to wait in bushes with a loaded gun, watching her friend emerge from a library, knowing she was about to end a life? The answer lies not in that parking lot, but in the twisted web of emotions that had been building for months in a small home, where 2 women discovered they both wanted something that was never theirs to claim. Joyce Smal had never been a stranger to bending the rules. Her criminal record painted the picture of a woman who found creative ways around life's obstacles. Insurance fraud in 2021, grand larceny that same year, followed by petty theft in 2022. But Joyce always managed to slip through the cracks of the justice system, avoiding serious consequences with an ability to talk her way out of trouble. At 64, Joyce lived alone in a modest home in Miami Gardens. Her days were quiet, predictable, filled with routine that people create when they're trying to hold their world together. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't particularly social, but she had something that many people lack: a desperate need to feel important, to feel needed by someone, anyone. That need would prove to be her downfall. One evening, Joyce was settling in for another night of solitude when a knock came at her door. Standing on her doorstep was Sarah Gabor, homeless, desperate, with nowhere to turn. Sarah's life had been a series of disappointments and setbacks that had eventually led her to the streets. She had no family to speak of, no support system, and no permanent place to call home. When Sarah asked Joyce for shelter, something stirred in Joyce's heart. Here was someone who needed her, someone she could help, someone who might fill the empty spaces in her carefully ordered but lonely life. Without hesitation, Joyce opened her door wide. "Come in," she said, and with those 2 words, set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. At first, Sarah's presence was exactly what Joyce had hoped for. The house felt less empty, less quiet. Sarah was grateful for the kindness, helping with household chores, sharing stories of her difficult past, bringing a warmth to the home that Joyce hadn't realized she'd been missing. For the first time in years, Joyce felt genuinely needed. The 2 women developed what seemed beautiful friendship. Sarah would tell stories about her childhood, sharing memories of her mother baking cookies every Sunday, the smell filling their small apartment with love and safety. When Sarah shared these memories, her eyes would light up with rare joy, and Joyce felt protective of that light, determined to keep it from being extinguished. Their conversations flowed naturally. They laughed together, shared comfortable silences, and created a bond that felt genuine and healing for both of them. Joyce had found the companionship she'd been craving, and Sarah had found not just shelter, but a friend who seemed to understand her struggles. But Joyce had a secret, one that would eventually poison their friendship and lead to unspeakable tragedy. Joyce had been involved with a married man for years. It wasn't the relationship she could talk about openly or celebrate publicly. He had his family, his responsibilities, his other life that Joyce was never truly part of. But in stolen moments at cheap motels, in whispered phone calls when his wife wasn't around, Joyce had convinced herself that what they shared was real, meaningful, worth the complexity and secrecy. She had accepted the limitations of their relationship, the fact that she would always come second to his marriage. It wasn't ideal, but it was hers, and that sense of ownership, however tenuous, had become central to Joyce's identity. Before we continue with this devastating tale, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. because the truth behind what happened next will shock you to your core. When Sarah entered Joyce's life, the dynamics began to shift in ways that Joyce hadn't anticipated. Sarah didn't just make herself comfortable in Joyce's home, she began to take an interest in Joyce's life, including her relationship with the married man. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Sarah would ask casual questions about him, where he worked, what he was involved, whether he treated Joyce well. Joyce initially interpreted this as the natural curiosity of a friend who cared about her well-being. But as the days passed, something about Sarah's interest began to feel different, more intense, more personal than it should have been. Sarah's questions became more specific, more probing. She wanted to know about his habits, his schedule, his personality in ways that went beyond friendly concern. When he would visit Joyce's home, Sarah's behavior changed. She would linger in conversations with him, laugh too enthusiastically at his jokes, find reasons to be in the same room. Joyce began to notice subtle changes in Sarah's demeanor when the subject of her boyfriend came up. Sarah would guard her phone more carefully, quickly putting it away when Joyce entered the room. She would make comments that seemed designed to probe Joyce's feelings about the relationship. "He seems romantic," or "I bet he really knows how to treat a woman." The seed of suspicion, once planted, began to grow with frightening speed. Joyce's mind started playing tricks on her, analyzing every glance, every word, every gesture for hidden meaning. Was Sarah genuinely interested in Joyce's happiness, or was she plotting something more sinister? The woman who had seemed such a blessing was beginning to feel threatening. The paranoia consumed Joyce's thoughts day and night. She found herself watching Sarah's every move, looking for signs of betrayal, evidence of deception. When Sarah would leave the house for a few hours, Joyce would imagine her meeting secretly with the married man. When Sarah received phone calls, Joyce wondered if they were from him. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Joyce decided to confront Sarah directly. The conversation took place on a quiet afternoon when the tension between them had become too thick to ignore. "Sarah, we need to talk," Joyce said, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. Sarah looked up from the magazine she'd been reading, sensing immediately that something was wrong. "About what?" "I've been noticing things," Joyce began, the words tumbling out faster than she could control them. "The way you look at him, the way you talk about him. You're always asking questions, being too familiar. Why are you so interested in my boyfriend?" Sarah's reaction was one of genuine surprise and confusion. "What are you talking about, Joyce?" "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to get by. There's nothing going on." But Joyce was beyond rational thought. The jealousy and fear had taken root too deeply. Sarah's denials only fueled her suspicions further. If there was nothing going on, why did Sarah seem so defensive? Why couldn't she look Joyce in the eye when she answered? That night, Joyce lay awake planning her next move. She needed proof, evidence that would confirm what her heart already knew to be true. The next opportunity came when she met her boyfriend at their usual motel. After their intimate encounter, as he slept peacefully beside her, Joyce made a decision that would haunt her forever. She reached for his phone, knowing she was crossing a line but feeling she had no choice. Her hands shook as she scrolled through his messages, call logs, searching for any sign of communication with Sarah. But there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no evidence whatsoever of any contact between Sarah and her boyfriend. Joyce stared at the phone screen in confusion and frustration. She had been so certain, so convinced that her suspicions were justified. The absence of evidence should have been a relief, but instead it only made her more determined to find the truth she was convinced was being hidden from her. Over the following days, Joyce's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began following Sarah, making excuses to leave the house so she could spy on her friends' activities. She took notes, documenting every person Sarah spoke to, every place she went, looking for patterns that might reveal the affair she was certain was happening. But still, nothing. Sarah's routine was mundane, innocent, exactly what it appeared to be. She went to the library, ran errands, visited the few places in the community where homeless individuals could find resources and support. There were no secret meetings, no clandestine phone calls, no evidence of the betrayal Joyce was convinced was taking place. The lack of proof only deepened Joyce's obsession. She began to believe that Sarah was simply too clever, too careful to leave obvious evidence. This absence of proof became, in Joyce's twisted logic, proof itself of how calculated and deceptive Sarah truly was. By early October 2023, Joyce had reached a breaking point. The woman who had once opened her heart and home to someone in need had transformed into someone consumed by jealousy and rage. Every day that passed without concrete evidence of Sarah's betrayal only convinced Joyce that Sarah was more cunning than she had initially realized. On the morning of October 11th, Joyce made a decision that would change everything. She retrieved the Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun she kept in her home and slipped it into her purse. The weight of the weapon felt heavy against her side, but not as heavy as the burden of suspicion and rage she had been carrying for weeks. Joyce knew Sarah's routine by now. She knew that Sarah often spent time at the North Dade Regional Library, using their computers and resources. It was a public place, busy enough that Sarah would feel safe, but with enough open space that Joyce could get close enough to do what she felt needed to be done. Joyce arrived at the library that afternoon and positioned herself in the bushes near the parking lot. The rational part of her mind, the part that still remembered the kindness she had once felt for Sarah, whispered that this was madness, that she was about to destroy her own life over suspicions that might be completely unfounded. But that voice was drowned out by the roar of betrayal, jealousy, and obsession that had been building for months. In Joyce's mind, Sarah had taken advantage of her kindness, had plotted to steal the one relationship that mattered to her, had played the role of grateful friend while secretly working to destroy Joyce's happiness. At 5:30 p.m., Sarah emerged from the library, completely unaware of the danger waiting for her. She walked toward the parking lot with the easy stride of someone who had no reason to fear for her life, no idea that her friend had become her executioner. Joyce stepped out from her hiding place and began walking towards Sarah with determined strides. The moment Sarah saw her, some primal instinct must have kicked in, because she immediately turned and began to run. But Joyce was beyond reasoning now, beyond mercy, beyond any emotion except the cold certainty that Sarah had to pay for what she had done, or what Joyce believed she had done. The first shot rang out across the parking lot, sharp and definitive. Sarah stumbled but kept running, her survival instincts overriding the pain. The second shot brought her to the ground, but still she tried to crawl away, to escape the woman who had once offered her sanctuary. In those final moments, Sarah turned back toward Joyce, perhaps hoping to reason with her, to understand why this was happening, to plead for her life. But Joyce's face was a mask of cold determination. There would be no mercy, no last-minute reprieve, no moment of clarity that might stop what was about to happen. The third shot, fired at close range, struck Sarah in the head. Her struggles ceased instantly. The woman who had once shared stories about her mother's cookies, who had brought laughter and companionship to Joyce's lonely home, was gone. Joyce stood over the body for a moment, the smoking gun still in her hand. Witnesses later described her demeanor as eerily calm, as if she had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. She walked away from the scene without urgency, without apparent remorse, leaving Sarah's body in the parking lot as the sun began to set over Miami Gardens. When police arrived at the scene, they found Sarah Gabor's body surrounded by the detritus of an ordinary day. Parked cars, fallen leaves, the everyday objects of a life that had been brutally interrupted. Miami-Dade Fire Rescue pronounced her dead at 5:40 p.m., just 10 minutes after Joyce had made the decision to end her friend's life. The investigation that followed was swift and decisive. Witnesses had seen the shooting, had watched Joyce calmly walk away from the scene. Within an hour, police had located Joyce and placed her under arrest. When they found the discarded weapon on a walking trail north of the library, ballistics tests confirmed what everyone already knew. Joyce Smal had murdered Sarah Gabor in cold blood. During questioning, Joyce's demeanor remained unnaturally calm. When asked why she had killed her friend, her response was chilling in its simplicity. She was agitating me. No remorse, no tears, no recognition of the magnitude of what she had done. Just a flat, emotionless explanation that revealed the depth of her psychological break from reality. Joyce was charged with first-degree murder and held without bond at the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center. Her defense attorney, Aylin Pinate Hernandez, faced the challenging task of representing a client whose actions seemed to defy rational explanation. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by questions about Joyce's mental state. Had she been suffering from a psychological break that diminished her capacity to understand right from wrong? Or had her actions been the result of careful planning and premeditation? Expert witnesses were called to evaluate Joyce's mental competency, but no clear diagnosis emerged. The community struggled to understand how a woman who had once shown such kindness could transform into a cold-blooded killer. As the case wound through the legal system, one fact became increasingly clear. Sarah Gabor had been an innocent victim of Joyce's paranoid delusions. Investigation after investigation found no evidence that Sarah had ever had any romantic involvement with Joyce's boyfriend. The affair that had consumed Joyce's thoughts, that had driven her to murder, had existed only in her own mind. The married man at the center of this tragedy remained largely anonymous throughout the proceedings, but his role in creating the emotional conditions that led to Sarah's death could not be ignored. His decision to maintain a long-term extramarital relationship had created a situation where Joyce felt she had ownership over something that was never truly hers to possess. The trial of Joyce Smal became a study in the dangerous intersection of mental illness, obsession, and violence. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had carefully planned and executed a murder based on her own paranoid delusions. They argued that Joyce's calm demeanor after the shooting, her methodical disposal of the weapon, and her lack of remorse all pointed to a calculated crime rather than a moment of emotional breakdown. The defense tried to portray Joyce as a woman who had suffered a complete psychological break, driven to violence by mental illness and emotional trauma. They argued that her actions, while inexcusable, were the result of a diseased mind rather than criminal intent. But as testimony unfolded, a clearer picture emerged of what had really happened in Joyce's home during those weeks leading up to the murder. Sarah Gabor had been nothing more than a homeless woman grateful for shelter and friendship. Her interactions with Joyce's boyfriend had been minimal, polite, and entirely innocent. The elaborate conspiracy that Joyce had constructed in her own mind had no basis in reality. Witnesses testified about Sarah's character, describing her as a gentle soul who had struggled with homelessness but had never shown any inclination toward deception or manipulation. Former acquaintances spoke of her genuine gratitude for Joyce's kindness and her complete lack of interest in romantic entanglements. The most damaging testimony came from Joyce herself. In recorded statements made during her initial arrest, she displayed a chilling lack of empathy for her victim. When asked if she regretted her actions, Joyce showed no emotion, no recognition that she had taken an innocent life. "She was bothering me," Joyce repeated when pressed for more details about her motive. "I told her to stay away from what was mine." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Milton Hers sentenced Joyce Smal to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Joyce showed no emotion, no recognition of the gravity of what she had lost. The woman who had once been capable of kindness, who had opened her home to someone in need, had been consumed by her own demons and would spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes. Sarah Gabor's memorial service was attended by dozens of people from the community who had been touched by her gentle spirit. Despite having so little in material terms, Sarah had managed to impact the lives of many people through small acts of kindness and her resilient optimism in the face of tremendous hardship. In the aftermath of the trial, Sarah's story became a rallying cry for better mental health resources and support for homeless individuals. Community organizations that had known Sarah spoke about her dreams of finding stable housing and her hopes for rebuilding her life. Those dreams had been cut short by one woman's inability to distinguish between reality and delusion. The married man whose relationship with Joyce had set these tragic events in motion quietly disappeared from public view. Whether he remained with his wife or whether their marriage survived the scandal was never disclosed. But his role in creating the emotional powder keg that exploded in that library parking lot served as a stark reminder of how extramarital relationships can have consequences far beyond the people directly involved. For Joyce Smal, justice came in the form of a life sentence that ensured she would never again have the opportunity to hurt another innocent person. The woman who had let jealousy and obsession override her capacity for reason and compassion would spend her remaining years in a prison cell, with nothing but time to contemplate the magnitude of her actions. But for Sarah Gabber, justice was more complex. No sentence could bring her back, could restore the life that had been cut short just as she was beginning to find stability and friendship. The true justice for Sarah lay in the way her story inspired others to examine the warning signs of unhealthy obsession and to recognize the tragic consequences when love becomes confused with possession. In the end, Joyce Smal's story serves as a devastating reminder that kindness without wisdom can be dangerous, that opening our hearts to others requires not just compassion, but also healthy boundaries and realistic expectations. The woman who had once saved Sarah from the streets ultimately became her destroyer, transforming from savior to executioner in a psychological journey that revealed the darkest potential of human nature. Justice was served when Joyce received her life sentence, but the real victory lies in the lessons learned from this tragedy. Sarah Gabber's memory lives on as a testament to resilience in the face of hardship and as a warning about the deadly consequences of unchecked obsession. If this story has impacted you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on more true crime stories that reveal the complex nature of justice and human behavior. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how we can better recognize and address the warning signs of dangerous obsession. And remember, in a world where mental health challenges are often invisible, we all have a responsibility to look out for one another and to seek help when our emotions threaten to overwhelm our judgment. Thank you for joining us for this difficult but important story, and we'll see you in the next episode.